Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tanya Verhulp, and I'm the Director of Executive Education here at the Haskayne School of Business. Thank you all for joining us today to spend some time over your lunch hour for the next session as part of our series, Haskayne Connects. Thank you to many of you who were able to join us for the last 3 sessions, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for the first time. Haskayne Connects was created to help you navigate through these uncertain times with quick tips and ideas to move forward. We're hosting these sessions every week on a variety of topics, so continue to watch for upcoming invitations, and we hope you'll continue to join us. I would now like to welcome Catherine Connolly, who will be moderating our session today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And I'm really pleased to be able to partner with Phil Davidson today for our discussion, Apples and Oranges, Structured Creativity to Innovate your firm's revenue streams. And I've been really pleased to participate in moderating some of these sessions, because what I've noticed about our look at the COVID-19 crisis is we've been looking at it as a catalyst to some positive things in our community. But that's not necessarily what we've been seeing in some of the media, et cetera. So you look at what Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist with CIBC, has indicated, and he quoted, "It is wishful thinking to believe that things are going back to normal by the summer." And similarly, Jason Kirby from Maclean said, "Canada's economy may never return to what it once was." So I guess I turn it over to you, Phil, and your thoughts.
I wish this was a national sentiment, something just in Toronto or Ottawa or somewhere else. But even the Calgary Economic Development, they did a survey the other day, and 55% of their respondents said, you know what, this COVID thing has affected me, directly, negatively. And that's a big hit. And so when we look at how are firms dealing with it, well, they're immediately going to their costs. And in the article that Deb Cummings produced on it, was talking about how it's easier to cut, buying materials, CapEx, drop payroll. I mean, these are very quick reactions, and I'm not criticizing them. I used to do them in restructuring, but I think for us to rebuild our economy, we've got to start looking at the other side of the equation, because we have costs and we have revenues. So today we're going to look at revenues.
Okay, but that's not to forget about the costs, correct?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so I guess to kick things off, let's assume I run a small or medium-sized business, or maybe a division of a larger firm, and we've just been smacked hard by this pandemic, and we've experienced some severe operational limitations, challenges, however you'd want to look at it. And I'm concerned that this situation might stretch out, or worse, might turn into a recurring event, that W the media keeps referring to. So I guess what I'd like to understand from you is how can I shock-proof my business?
You bet. So what we're going to talk about today is building revenue streams. Okay, so we're looking at a structured approach to do it, rather than just a hit or miss. And in particular, we're looking at how do we develop alternative revenue streams for the business that we already have. So
okay, so I guess I look at you and I say, I just want to understand, I mean, this may sound like a really junior question, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, what are revenue streams?
You bet. Revenue streams is just simply, how does money come into our business? When we think of it, we build a product or we provide a service and people pay us money, but there's some condition under which they do that. And so, as the picture shows, it's just the inflow. It's the inflow of money. Now, today what we're looking at is there any way to create additional inflows? So we're not changing necessarily the nature of our business, and we'll deal with that a little later, but how do we create additional inflows of money coming in? So some of the times in class, what I do is we create a scenario, and let's apply our discussion today to a particular scenario. I'm going to be a small or medium-sized business, and I produce this oil tank. Now, this isn't just any oil tank. This is a fantastic oil tank. We're very good at what we do. You see that we have this nice filter in the middle. And so this is for restaurants use kitchen oil. We're not talking about cars or that kind of oil. And restaurants, when they put their used kitchen oil into this filter, then it will separate out the nice clean oil at the bottom. We did our research beforehand. We figured out, how clean does that have to be for other markets to now use it for other purposes. And then my drawing isn't good enough to show, we have the ability to clean out the top as well, obviously, to get rid of the semi-solids. And so our business is that we manufacture these. Okay, so let me ask you, what's my primary revenue stream?
I would suggest you sell the tanks to restaurants.
Absolutely. So $4,000 or $5,000, let's say $5,000. These are made out of aluminum. They're rugged, they're environmentally friendly, they're vandalism proof, you name it. These are great. And so when I sell it to our restaurant, I get back my $5,000. I pay my supplier, I pay my labor, and I keep some for myself as long as I sell enough of them. And on we go. So that's my primary revenue stream. But what if I said, okay, how about I rent them? And you go, well, what's the advantage of renting them? Well, you think of what's going through right now, and restaurants are just, they're hurting. They've been for 2 months where they weren't allowed to be open. They're strapped for cash. Maybe getting rid of this barrier, this $5,000 hurdle to be one of my clients, if I drop it down to where I can rent it for $50 a month, $40 a month, whatever the number is, I can bring more people into my market. And so that might be one reason. And the other reason is because it's not a big price tag all of a sudden, I might be able to incrementally increase my price a bit so that I actually have a better margin by renting than by selling. But I've changed my model a little bit because now I've got to arrange financing for inventory because I'm going to have these units sitting at different restaurants where I still own them and the restaurant is simply renting them. Okay, so that's a scenario, and we're going to come back to a little later. What are other alternatives for alternative revenue streams?
Okay, so I should be looking at alternative revenue streams, but I guess that's a concept. I'd kind of like to know what I should do. So I've heard commentary before, or advocates suggest that you should play to your strengths or focus at what you're good at. Some say try and make anything work in this environment. And on top of that, there's the how. So I've heard advocates suggest that, you isolate yourself, focus, and come up with some huge inspiration. I tend to be someone that likes to collaborate with others, so I have a bit of a different approach. But depending on the approach, how do I make it work, and how do I make it most effective for me?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like you, I'm not really good at this isolation. It doesn't work for me. Although I have gone to the mountains once in a while when I couldn't get over something. But listen, a team will work. A team will certainly work better. Before I get into that, though, I want to address the issue that you raised about playing to your strengths.
Okay.
And so I know a couple weeks ago, Alex talked about effectuation. There's different theories. The kicker is by playing to your strength, you reduce your risk. So when we're looking for new revenue streams, we are taking risk. And I loved Richard's point last week saying, listen, now is as good a time as ever, or better, to take some risks, right? We need to get going again. We need to get things rebuilt. So not against risk, but by playing to your strengths, you get to minimize because you already know your suppliers, you know your market, you know your margins, you know what you're doing. So I certainly do encourage you to play to your strengths.
Platform off of what you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So dealing with how do we, how do we do this? I want to stress that we need a foundation. And that's why the image here is just simply a foundation. Building up top never lasts unless it has a good foundation. And so the foundation is in the structure. The title, we call it Apples and Oranges, Structured Creativity. So if we look at IXL, it's a firm out of Boston that does consulting and works with the Global Innovation Management Institute. And they've set up 5 steps for managing innovation. And when we're looking for new revenue streams, this is definitely an innovation. We're trying to change our business model. How do we get money for providing our product or service? So the foundation is in the first step. It's in this setup. And that setup is really, really important because at that point, we're defining what is our challenge? What are we trying to solve? And I don't use the word problem, and I don't do that intentionally because I'm not trying to put it in a negative context. It's very important that we focus on the positive, but it has a purpose. And I love Jeremy Gucci when he does his presentation for Future Trends 2020. He says, his opening step is reset your expectations. Well, what's he trying to do? Listen, we get so focused on this is what we do and this is how we do it. And we got to break that. For us to be creative, for us to come up with alternatives, we've got to get out of this. This is what I've always done and this is how I do it. And at the same time, I think because we're focusing on the revenue side, not the cost side, I do think it's really important to focus on the positive.
I know sometimes we get stuck in these ruts and we don't even realize we're there. That's the challenge. But I guess what I'd like to do now is maybe do a poll and see where our audience is at. So I'd like to ask the question out there. Do you think Canadians in general are positive in light of the current COVID environment? And it's just a binary response, yes, no. And while we're waiting for that, we'll come back to the results in a minute, but maybe we can keep moving, Phil.
Yeah, you betcha. And yet, sorry for not giving you a scale 1 to 5 or something like that, but really we're just looking, you know, do you feel optimistic? With what we're in, do we still have optimism? So listen, your firm might be bleeding red ink. And in this setup, what we're doing is we're defining what's the challenge that we're going to try to solve with creativity. And so our challenge might be, how can I increase our revenue per client, right? There's one way to change revenue. What alternative revenue streams can we develop that don't require us to become somebody that we're not, right? Back to playing to our strengths. How can I improve my margins? Well, these are challenges and they're questions, but there's a problem with them. They're all vague, right? I could improve these because research has found that the more specific your goals are, the more likely people are to actually commit to achieving them. And so I might change my question to, how can I improve our revenue per client by 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever your number is? Or what are 2 additional revenue streams? See, if I have a vague question, then anything works as an answer. And I don't know whether I'm still pushing to get there.
Well, I love this because if I'm seeing it right, you're building engagement by securing ownership and accountability. And I'm a big accountability person. And it also engages everybody in the process, correct?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And this is tough. Accountability is very difficult for managers because we want to be nice and we want to encourage. We're saying, hey, if we're in the creativity side, aren't we in the soft fuzzy stuff? Everybody's supposed to sit around the campfire and sing. No, not necessarily. We do need that accountability. And people will talk about stretch goals or big, hairy, audacious goals. How do we improve our revenue by 100% per client? Well, the challenge is that if a goal isn't perceived, so I'm not talking about reality, I'm talking about perception. If the goal isn't perceived by your team as being achievable, they have no incentive to pursue it. So just a caution. I love the big, hairy, audacious goals or whatever the term is this year, but just be cautious when you're doing that.
It can be a little deflating.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just like to do a bit of a recap here. So first I asked about how to stabilize or even strengthen. And I want to put down that there are some businesses that are actually strengthening in this environment. So I don't want to lose that concept, but I've asked how to strengthen my business in light of the COVID challenges. And you said to look for alternate revenue streams. And you emphasized the fact that I should leverage my strengths rather than chasing completely new ideas. And then I asked the how question of coming up with ideas for new revenue streams. And you spoke about the importance to set it up correctly, properly identify the challenge, making sure I'm engaging everybody in the process. So I have an idea of what's needed for the foundation, but I'm still a little curious as to how I can best get my creative juices flowing so that I can come up with the optimal solution. So I guess what I'd like to put to you is, what tools or scenarios can I deploy to make this happen?
You bet. So the first stage, this setup, the foundation, this is you as a leader that you need to figure this out. Okay, but now what we really want is we want to get other people involved. And so if you're running a one-man show or one-woman show, you have a small business, and we have a lot of them in Calgary, now's the time to take advantage of the good graces of some of your friends and get them engaged. Get outside of your comfort zone and start getting other people involved. Your spouse and your mom don't count. They'll love every idea you suggest, so just don't bother asking them, okay? But as a team now, we hit this diverge stage. So this is the second stage, and we have 2 primary objectives, okay? And the first is to reframe the challenge. You go, hang on. We just spent a bunch of time setting the challenge. Now you want us to reframe it? Absolutely. Why do I reframe it? Because when I, as the boss, create the challenge, do you know what? I end up putting my own limitations on it. I create my own little box for what I think would be a solution, and I don't do it on purpose. Go back to my examples. How can I change my revenue per client by 10%? Really, is that our problem? That could be a great solution, or 20% or whatever. But now I'm saying I can't have any more clients. I need my clients, and let's just change our revenue per client.
You're inadvertently challenging thinking.
Yeah.
Channeling thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So
okay.
if another team member looks at it and says, hang on, do you know what? I know other people that might be able to use our product, might be able to use our service. I have other ideas of how we can attack this without it being changing the margin per client, right? So the reason that we allow this, or we don't allow, we encourage this reframing by our team members, is that we really want to open up the scale of ideas that can come into the hat for consideration, right? Because we're setting the overall goal, and that's very important, but we got to be careful that we're still human, and we unintentionally create barriers and limitations to creativity. So, you know, and I want to remind you that Richard was talking last week about now is a really good time to take some of these risks. You know, the threshold for perfection has dropped both for our bosses as well as the market. And so, you know, we want ideas coming in today. If we're looking for alternative revenue streams for our business, we're going to take some risks.
People are actually applauding even some of the minor mistakes because they're saying, hey, people are getting out there and they're trying new things, and good for them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And the thing is, you know, a week after we went into lockdown, I emailed a friend of mine at Rogers and said, hey, I've got a great idea. I need $1 billion to do it. And I didn't get my $1 billion. But the fact is that there are opportunities out of what we're doing. I was at Safeway and just saw all the bottles of Minas hand sanitizer. And so we have examples right in town where people are saying, hey, do you know what? There's new ideas, new needs, priorities, and they're pursuing it. Okay, so I want to look at the
thinking styles.
Yeah. Well, I want to look at the second arrow here in this diverge, and that's about. Whoops, come back here. Started bouncing. We're looking for generating ideas. So the first one was we reframe the question, we reframe the challenge, and the second part is, so what are the ideas, right? And so this does lead us to different ways of thinking. And so IXL and Global Innovation Management, they talk about 6 distinct innovation styles. So let's take a look. Organization. Well, that one goes right across the board. In this whole process, we still have to be organized. Otherwise, creativity turns into chaos, and it doesn't serve a functional purpose. So the organization is there. In the setup, you'll notice that we had analytic. As a boss, I'm trying to figure out what am I trying to solve? What am I trying to achieve? What opportunity am I trying to take advantage of? And so I have some analytics there, but once I get into this diverge where I'm trying to create ideas or connecting, which we're going to deal with later, now all of a sudden that analytics, it's got to come off the table. And I apologize to all the engineers. Sorry, just suck it up, right? You got to wait. That comes back later. And the caution, that comes back later as well. But at this stage, we're looking for different modes of thinking. So what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for creativity. Fine, we know that. That's the discussion. We're looking for optimism, right? We did that poll question earlier, and we're going to come back to that here pretty quick. Is that optimism is actually a requirement to a certain extent for creativity. And so we really want people to say, I'm going to throw in this idea, and I think it might work. And you might be hearing it and going, whoa, that's crazy. That's
well,
okay.
And you're right, Phil. I mean, when we speak about optimism, why don't we take a look at the results of our poll?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we can show it up here now.
Can it get posted?
Yep, there we go.
No. Okay, so it's about 2 to 1, right? That we've lost our optimism compared to we're optimistic. And you know what? That doesn't surprise me. It saddens me, but I'm not sure which one I would pick either. So, you know, I'm unfortunately okay with it. But let's take a look at
Okay, well, just before you go there, I know you're just we're going to be winding down here pretty quick, but as Phil's going through his recap, I'd just like to say to the audience, think about our used restaurant kitchen oil sample. And I'd like to ask you, what are some of the alternative revenue streams? If you can think about that and maybe put it in the chat box. And then as Phil's sort of finishing up here, that can incent you to some of the responses. And then maybe towards the end, we'll review some of those and have a discussion.
Yeah, that'd be great. Now, and listen, there's two other thinking styles, by the way. One is emotional. And you go, why emotional? Well, emotional, part of it is that if we're taking risks, we want it to be something that we would be passionate, that we would actually be passionate about. We'll chase it. We'll invest time, energy, sacrifice to pursue it. So when you look at this diverge stage, right? I grew up in construction. Emotion, that was a dirty word. It didn't come out unless you accidentally hit yourself with a hammer. But these are the mindsets that get us going. And that emotion, that optimism is hard to have, especially in the current situation. And listen, we're not alone. We're not. I love this. Deloitte has this COVID dashboard. And one of the components that they have on it is that they're just tracking what's the sentiment out there. What are people thinking, feeling, talking about? The source of our information is press releases. So if you look at the very bottom on that graphic, press releases, and you look at them generally, so that was 8 nations, Europe, South America, North America, 10 times more positive than negative, the press releases that had anything to do with COVID. And you look at the social media, it's 6 times more negative than positive. Right? That's our natural bent, unfortunately, seems to be to focus on the negative side. Now in Canada, we're better off. We're 27 times more positive in our press. I have no idea why. But we're still 4 times more negative once it comes to people actually talking about it. And
well, let's avoid social media.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Don't
you better
get
go
me
back
going
to
on
the
that one.
structured thinking styles.
So, the issue is that this optimism, this is a culture that we have to develop as a leader. You know what? You actually have to put effort into generating optimism in your team, because that's necessary for us to work on this, to develop alternatives. And so this becomes a cultural thing. It's not an accidental, we tend to think of it as, is this a characteristic? Are you an optimistic person or a pessimistic person? I always said I'm a realist, right? That was my excuse for being pessimistic, probably. I don't know. But I want to carry on here, because we're looking now at the third stage, is this connect section. And when we're doing these ideas, everybody's familiar with the concepts. We've seen it in the show The Office, or probably have done it in your own office. These Post-it notes stuck all over, right? Well, this connect stage is very important. And we still have the creative and we still have the optimistic here, because what we're looking for are themes. We're looking for, which ideas can we put together? And this is why we still need that creative part, because sometimes it's hard to see the connections. But
well, and what you're not saying that being creative doesn't mean that you don't have rigor behind the process, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. This is what's very, very important, because otherwise it's, we do turn into the campfire episode. And so, here we're coming up with ideas, we're now putting them together. And what happens is when people create ideas, and so people that are posting on the chat, by the way, I'm ignoring the chat because I can't do 8 things at once, but
I know, but we're going to have to go to the chat pretty quick here. So,
yeah. So you can't criticize people there. That's not the stage, but you can build off them. And that's why this grouping is so important, is that we're starting to see what are themes that have different aspects, because these different aspects will turn into various, unique focuses for reaching different kinds of markets or different unique value propositions for the ones that we have. So this connect is very, very important, where we start to identify the themes that have come out from our exercise using our team. And you're absolutely right. There is rigor in that. And it's not until we've gone through that we, now that the engineers can breathe a sigh of relief, get back engaged. We need the analytical, we need the caution, because we have these ideas But if we just went and chased them all, we'd go broke.
Right.
And so our process at the Converge stage is really about how do we prioritize ideas? And when we're prioritizing, we're deciding what can we afford within or with our resources, what will actually reach our market, what will move the needle, right? We have these different, and everybody's going to have different priorities, but this Converge stage, this is where we're now able to look at the ideas and say, okay, that's a great idea, but it's going to require us to make this other change. You know, are we prepared to do that? But you've got to hold off on that. And the problem is that people want to jump to that back in stage 2. And when I say people, I'm in that boat.
So is this a good time to look at, and actually, funny enough, we haven't really had any suggestions in the chat session for alternative revenue streams for our restaurant oil example. I don't know if you want to offer up some of those, Phil, at this point, some of the things that some of your students in the past may have offered up. And then we can go to the 3 takeaways and questions. How does that sound?
Sure. If we take a look at our oil tanks, and let's go back here. What do we have? So we have a manufacturing plant, but what do? We did the research beforehand to find out how pure does that oil have to be for users. So we talked about, we sell these tanks and we rent these tanks. And sometimes I'll have students say, well, why don't we sell the oil? Why don't we, you know, those semi-solid food particles? Can we sell those? Would they be useful as dog food filler? Right, so these are ideas that can go up on the board, and it's not until you hit stage 4 where you'd have to come back and look at it and say, if I sold the tank to the restaurant, who owns the oil? Well, the restaurant does. Or the semi-solid food particles, who owns it? The restaurant does. So now I might have to change my model to where my agreement with the restaurant is, I'm going to give this to you for X dollars. Maybe it's on a lease. Maybe they pay me to take the stuff away. Right? There are businesses that all they do is they go and they collect stuff. Well, if I can store my tank there, then I can come and I can siphon out the used oil. You'll see my drawing, I wouldn't make a good engineer. My outflow is above the bottom, so my oil is going to stay in there. But I can clean out this stuff, and now I can sell the oil. And you go, yeah, but is this outside of your business? The reality is I had to know there was a market for that to know what kind of a filter I had to put in. So I've already done the research. I already know who those people are. And now, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, no, finish up, and then maybe we can go to your takeaways.
Yeah, you bet. So the, you know, if I'm going to change to where I'm dealing with the byproducts, one of the things that we've got to make sure we recognize is that, you know, I can't sell the tank to the restaurant and then show up at night and steal the stuff from inside of it. So I am going to change my business model, or I could create a mobile service that just goes around instead of having permanent tanks. You know, I got a smaller unit, goes around to small restaurants, and it just collects it every day. So there's different forms for us to generate revenue. We know who our clients are. They're restaurants. We know where we're going to get our material. And we know who's using this other. Okay, we want to jump to takeaways. Let's.
Only Phil, because I think we want to provide enough time for questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We need to respect that people have other things to do. Let's go the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And keep going. One more. First one, play to your strengths, right? So we're not trying to say, if you're building a business, you're used to working with apples, let's go chase something else. And people have this temptation because they see on Facebook, okay, nobody watching today pays attention to Facebook. You see it on LinkedIn, oh, here's a great idea, and these guys are so successful doing something else. Well, you know, the success stories go there, but to minimize your risk and still be able to take advantage of opportunities, play to your strengths. That's number one. Number two, set a foundation. When you're going through this process, we really need to know what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's very, very important that you define your goal or the challenge that you're trying to address so that your team knows what they're working on. Otherwise, back to the campfire. Number three, analysis is a great skill, but optimism is a culture that supports creativity. And right now, as we're trying to build our economy back, we're trying to get Calgary going again, We absolutely need creativity. We need to get revenue going. We can't recover by cutting costs. That can keep us alive for a while, but we got to start looking at how do we build our revenues again.
Perfect. Well, with that, then I will hand it over to Tanya, and maybe we can have some questions come in. And while Tanya's getting set up, I have one for you, if that's okay, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I looked at your chart, and I was looking at the first 3 steps, you know, the setup, diverge, and connect.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of someone who's done this really well? And the reason I'm asking is that maybe an aha moment for me if I given the example, that I could say, oh yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right. So, you know, I did this process with the Calgary Parking Authority the other year. And it was just simply, they had some challenges looking at, we've got competition, there's changes in traffic flows, and they're looking at what do we do as an organization. And so, you know, the leadership had met before to define what's the process that we're going to go through. And then as a board, they took the time to actually do this. And you know, I wish 3M were a Calgary company, because we went through a lot of little pieces of paper. But quite frankly, I don't care about the pieces of paper. But the idea just to identify what were certain trends that we wanted to pay attention to, and what were opportunities to pay or to take advantage of these trends. And it was a lot of fun. And listen, this was a room full of people that were engineers, lawyers, people that are really conditioned to think analytically. And yet we're willing to put all that on hold and put some crazy stuff on the board. And it was a really interesting experience to see what people would create as a twist off of what somebody else posts. And that's the value of not creating the criticism, or, you know, bringing reality into it too fast, is that the original idea can be bonkers. But when somebody else sees it and it triggers a thought, and they go, oh, okay, fine, we probably couldn't quite do that, but what if we did it with this twist? What if we did it with this change? And that's the lead, you know, that's the process that comes out of it. So yeah, we had a really good time going through it.
Perfect, thank you. Tanya, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks. So again, if anybody has any questions, if you click on the participant button at the bottom of your screen, a menu will appear asking you to raise your hand, and that will cause us to call on you once your hand is raised. Or alternatively, you can post your questions in the chat, and I can ask them from there. So we do have a question, Phil, that says, can you discuss how to encourage innovation without incurring too much cost from the ideas that come in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And listen, that really comes back to, let's see if we can find the right one. Number 8? No, slide 6. Come on, come back here. Part 4. Part 4 is all about the converge. And so what happens is this is where we get to prioritize, because our problem is that if we go up front and we say to our team, okay, we got to come up with all these great ideas. And by the way, we've got $50. We have $500. We have 500,000, whatever, right? Budget is always relative to the size of your operation. We automatically create these filters. And so we intentionally defer that to the 4th stage. And I ran into this, last week. I was talking to somebody and I was saying, you know what, we really need, we really need some creative ideas for a particular, I don't even remember what it was for. I just remember going, we need something that's really creative. And I know somebody who's really creative. And I said, we got to go talk to that person and let's just get them to throw some ideas out. And the person I was talking to said, oh yeah, that's great. So we need to tell him, you know, make sure that he knows, and they start to limit. They start to identify the limitations, right? And we do that naturally. And the problem is, as soon as we do that, people focus on that. And so this is really the job of the converge stage, where we say, okay, we have to prioritize. We've only got so much money. And our idea was to take our oil tanks to Mexico We think they cook with more oil in Mexico. There's bigger demand. And, you know, we've got left in our bank account $50,000. We probably shouldn't be going to Mexico, whether they use a lot of oil or not. And that's going to come out in a converge stage. But you know what? The idea that somebody would post a note saying, hey, we should go to Mexico because they use lots of oil in their cooking. By the way, I don't know if they use lots of oil in their cooking, but if they do, somebody else might look at it and go, nah, that's crazy. But you know, maybe there are other people that use oil. Maybe we could do this not just in restaurants. Are there places that have large kitchens? Could we maybe make a deal with the Canadian military? They must feed a lot of people. How about ATCO's remote camps? The oil sands, right? They might not have thought of that until they saw somebody's crazy idea that we should take this thing to Mexico. So coming out of that converge, that's where that component comes in. You've got to watch that we bring realism back in. That's where we have the analytics and we have the caution. Let's not go broke chasing the moon.
But if I hear you correctly, Phil, you don't want to get there too quickly or you just stymie all that creativity and optimism, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
The first round usually is crazy. Often is crazy.
I'm good with crazy.
Yeah. Well, you know, maybe we need it. I think we do need more crazy at the moment. But what happens is it's the ability for people to create new ideas off of the crazy stuff. Because otherwise, everything, our whole term of reference is, here's what we do, here's how we do it. And so, you know, to get off of that, you need to see some crazy stuff to say, oh, hey, actually, that gives me an idea. What if we did this? Now, you're still just throwing in an idea because somebody else might look at it and go, oh, that's still crazy, right? That's fine, but this becomes a process. So your comment was on timing, you know, the rush to get to the result. This is a process. We call it a structured process, and that's very, very intentional. And as soon as you rush to the end, you know, it's just, you'll have missed opportunities that you could have seen had you let it play its course.
Great. So there's another question. Do you have an example of where this process has been done extremely well?
So I gave the one that was the Calgary Parking Authority. And what their issue was coming out of that, you know, I've got to be careful what I share. Calgary Parking Authority has developed some fantastic software for vehicles because obviously they're responsible for maintaining, you know, parking on the streets as well as in the parkades. And this became a business opportunity for them because other jurisdictions don't have this. And they had the ability to drive down the street and it identifies license plates as they're going. Like they don't have to have a person sitting there walking minus 30. And so some of these things came out of just, instead of focusing on, this is what we do, this is how we do it, because what do? We're in Calgary. We're the Calgary Parking Authority. It's in our name. Right? But people started to chase ideas and it was an example of where they were able to come up.
Great. What advice would you provide to someone seeking app development grants or funding? And how do you feel about crowdfunding?
Okay, so I'm absolutely not an expert on crowdfunding. I have never done it. I know some people that have. You know, I think half the time the value of crowdfunding, and if somebody's done this, can you please correct me on here? But it seems to me that the cases that I've studied that use crowdfunding, part of the function is to raise some cash. A lot of the function is to raise some awareness. So this is one way to start getting your name out. You'll see the stories, particularly in the media, when somebody does it and wow, the thing just goes viral, right? And so we love those. When you look at the actual average raise on crowdfunding, it's not so high. Now, there are people that teach, I know we have courses right here at Haskayne about how to improve your odds, how to come up with more funds. There's two that I can think of. Dr. Kayani that teaches a course on it. And the other one was grants. And I remember working for a firm one point where we put a lot of focus on chasing grants. And I'll be honest with you, it frustrated me because the grants sometimes I didn't think were worth the time it spent or it took us to get there. So to me, this is it, and I'm not saying that grants don't have a point. We got one that ended up being worth about $1 million, and it enabled us to partner with a firm internationally to develop some technology. You know, probably the biggest benefit out of that grant came back to the recognition. It was just the legitimacy that, hey, this organization was willing to put that much money into us. You know, they must be serious. They must have some idea of what they're doing. They must be good at it. Pay attention to them.
And it is a bit of a turkey trail. I don't want to take us down there, but I've been successful in a number of grants, and they've been wonderful. And exactly as you say, Phil. And there was one that comes to mind that I will not name that became this monster that needed feeding. And I think we actually had to deploy most of the funds we received to resources to respond to the grant in terms of supplying all the information that was asked for. So it's a bit of a turkey trail from this, but I think it's good to know what you're signing up for. Yeah.
Be realistic up front. How long is this going to take you?
Yeah.
And is it going to be worth it? It's not sustainable because you can't keep surviving on grants. At some point, you've got to develop a revenue stream that's sustainable.
Yeah.
But they serve a purpose, right? Especially in early commercialization. Alberta Innovates has them, Innovate Calgary has them. Sorry, I said those in reverse. There's some really good ones, but I
have another question. Oh, sorry, Phil. I have another question that's come in.
Yeah, you bet.
What resources can be brought to the forefront in the creative stage to ensure you're being global?
To ensure your team's what?
To ensure that you're being global.
Global.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So part of this comes back to who's in the room with you, right? It's hard to have a very homogenous group. And I grew up in a small town here in central Alberta. God bless it, we're all alike. And so we get in the room and we all come up with the same ideas. And that's not to say that they're not smart people. I think I know a lot of smart people in that place, but our ideas tend to come from our experience. And so when you're saying, you know, what can I bring to the table to ensure that I have a global outlook on it? Do you have people with a global outlook in your team? Are they part of your organization? Right? Now, sometimes we can bring in outsiders. I mean, we pay consultants for that all the time. And that's fine. If we don't have them in our team, you might have to go look for them. And from a global standpoint, EDC is still out there that is very focused on how can we help you develop international markets. When I was doing some work with a software firm here in Calgary, we did a tremendous amount of work with the commissioner's office out of Foreign Affairs. And those people were just amazing. I mean, they set up some great meetings for us in Brazil, in Dubai, in Vietnam, you name it. They were just amazing to work with. And so I definitely recommend them. Now, odds are you might not be able to get them to come in for the initial stages of a presentation or of your diverge stage of coming up with creative ideas. But you know what you might want to do is to engage them in the converge process. Like, what are the challenges? Our business is big enough to go to Mexico. You know, we've got enough resources, and we think that that's, you know, somebody says they cook with a lot of oil. Maybe that's a good market. Okay, so if we have the resources to go there, they might be a good one to bring into play to say, so how is that managed here in Mexico? Because what we might find is that they have a lot of oil, but they don't process it. They don't process the way we do. They don't care about it the way we do, or their standards are so much higher than what we have. We'd really have to revamp ours to work. So if we're going to do that, go in with our eyes open. So the commissioner's office, or commissioners, not commissioner, out of Foreign Affairs Canada, they're fantastic. and we have regional reps. So we have people right here in Alberta. You don't have to immediately jump out to the lady in Brazil or Vietnam or, you know, Brussels. Talk to the local, and they'll put you in touch with these different people. And they're a fantastic resource.
I think we have one more question before we wrap up. And it's something I think Richard referenced last week as well. So it said, we tend to train people to get rid of variance, and it sounds like sometimes you need variance to create innovation. Is that correct? And can you artificially create variance?
You know, I love the way he framed that last week, is that we train, and I teach MBAs here, we train people to get rid of that variance, you know, reduce your cost variance. I was in a meeting at the Royal Bank a couple of years ago, and somebody said, you university people, you beat the creativity out of people. I was offended originally. And then I went home and it's like, yeah, maybe we do, right? This is a time where we absolutely need creativity. And this is why, you know, I love this thinking style concept, the way that IXL presents this, is that you really have to intentionally defer that. Now, the second part of that question is, can you artificially create variance? Variance will come as soon as you start doing something new. Trust me, it will come automatically. So the challenge is, can I get people to not focus on what do we do, how do we do it, right? And to let go. And that requires you to get rid of as soon as somebody says something, our first reaction, that's stupid, right? Because it might have been stupid. You might be absolutely correct. But now that person isn't going to speak again. Why? Nobody likes being called stupid, indirectly or directly, in front of peers. And so, boy, you got to watch your face, you know, your body language. And so when you go into this, you actually have to instruct your team. Listen, this is how this is going to work. It isn't going to work unless you guys learn to control your reactions to what you think is crazy. I encourage crazy at the moment. Crazy is probably not the right word, but.
Well, and they're going to be looking to their leader for permission in that, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I guess right now, I just want to say, I think we're wound up now, right, Tanya? I think we are. Okay, perfect.
No more questions.
I would just like to say a huge thanks to Phil and all your enthusiasm. I think it was deployed amongst the group here today, so thank you very much. And a huge thanks to Lauren, Tanya, Janelle, Patrick, and Sandra for just making sure that this comes to all of you. A huge amount of effort goes behind the scenes, and so thank you very much for all that you do for us. And with that, I'll wish everybody a safe rest of your week, and thank you for attending.
Thanks. Have a great week. Have a crazy week.